Professor, listen, let's just jump right into it because I mean, I just kind of want your overall kind of like your 30,000 foot at these two declarations because they're pretty big bombshells.
The business with regard to NATO is somewhat different. It reflects the fact that Trump is desperate. He's flailing around and he's pretending that if he can just get the NATO allies involved in opening the strait, that we'll live happily ever after, we'll get some sort of victory. And this is crazy. It doesn't matter whether the Europeans come in or not. We're not going to open the straits with naval forces, whether they're European or American. But I think the more general point here is that the United States and Israel made a colossal blunder when they attacked Iran on February 28th. And we have no way of either getting out of this war or winning this war. And in fact, as you look at it, Iran holds almost all of the cards. So we're in a desperate situation. And then this goes back to the whole NATO business. Trump, of course, wants to blame the Europeans for not coming into the fight. But the Europeans are smart enough to know that this is a fight that they don't want to get into. They didn't start it, and it's a losing war. So why would they enter? So that's basically where you are today.
Yeah, we're gonna take each of those in turn to kind of get the ramifications of what could happen, because I think too few people are aware of just how desperate the straits are and how much of a risk that we're facing, and especially if we have two unforced errors. We'll get to that NATO part in a second. Let's jump first of all into the first issue here with President Trump. This was on his Truth Social out this morning. Iran's new regime president, much less radicalized and far more intelligent than his predecessors, has just asked the United States of America for a ceasefire. We will consider when the Hormuz Strait is open, free, and clear. Until then, we are blasting Iran into oblivion, or as they say, back into the Stone Ages, President DJT. First of all, there is no new president. It's still President Pezeshkian, so I'm not sure what he's talking about there. But even before I get into what President Pezeshkian has actually said, what may have prompted this, what is your view there that President Trump will then on social media tell everybody that basically they are begging for a ceasefire?
Well, it's simply not true. The Iranians have made this clear. There's not even any negotiations that we know of taking place. So I don't know what to say. He just makes these stories up. And what can you say?
Well, we can look a little bit at what may have prompted this. One would imagine and one would hope that for President Trump to say something like that, that would have been because of some private behind-the-scenes negotiations, some conversations that are only taking place between the two capitals, that maybe that's what it's in. But now we realize that maybe it's something else. It could be something that was on Radio Free Liberty Europe on open source yesterday. This is just yesterday, where President Pezeshkian said that he has the necessary will for peace. But when you look at what he actually said, it was this: we possess the necessary will to end this conflict, provided that essential conditions are met, especially the guarantees required to prevent repetition of the aggression. The solution to normalizing the situation is the cessation of their aggressive attacks, Pezeshkian said yesterday. One may wonder if President Trump saw something about cessation and we're willing to, end this conflict, looking for peace. Maybe he just saw the headline, not realizing that they didn't ask the U.S. for a ceasefire. They said that they want America to cease its fire. If their conditions are met, then they'll join in. What do you make of just the fact that it appears anyway that President Trump read this headline and then made this comment publicly, and what may be going on behind the scenes?
Who knows? I mean, to be honest, who knows what he's thinking? Sometimes you listen to him talk and you think he's a mad king. Other times you think he just misunderstands what the Iranians are saying. But number one, the Iranians have made it clear they're not interested in a ceasefire any more than the Russians are interested in a ceasefire in Ukraine. We keep going down this road. The Iranians would be crazy to agree to a ceasefire. They're in the driver's seat. And from their point of view, the best thing to do is to continue to wage the war vigorously. All this talk about, we're on the verge of some sort of agreement, we're going to end this war in 2 or 3 weeks. I don't know what he's talking about. And furthermore, there are just a number of big dimensions that have to be dealt with if you're going to settle this war. For example, what's going to happen with economic sanctions? Are we going to end economic sanctions on Iran? What about a nuclear agreement? We don't have a JCPOA anymore. We've just been engaged in this war. You have hardliners in charge in Iran. What are they going to agree to in terms of nuclear enrichment? Are they going to let IAEA inspectors back in? What's going to happen with the Strait of Hormuz? What's going to happen with American military bases in the region? The Iranians have demanded that not only American military bases be removed from the region, but they've also said that American companies, American businesses have to leave the region. And they've been targeting those businesses inside the various Gulf states. So all these issues are on the table. And you can rest assured the Iranians are going to drive a hard bargain. They'd be crazy not to. They're dealing with Israel and the United States, two genocidal states that have decided to put their gun sights on Iran. The United States and Israel represent an existential threat to Iran. Don't you think if you're facing an existential threat and you're in the driver's seat, which the Iranians are, that don't you think they're going to drive a hard bargain? Don't you think they're going to try and get everything they can in terms of concessions from the United States? The answer, of course, is yes. So the idea that we can quickly solve this one and all we have to do is have a ceasefire or get the Americans to stop bombing Iran and then the Iranians will be happy is not a serious argument. We are in the deep, deep kimchi here. One cannot underestimate what a colossal blunder we made starting this war. And getting out of it is going to be extremely difficult.
And it's gotten a little bit more difficult, I think, with statements like this, because if there's already ill will because of the diplomacy and what happened in, to start the 2025 war and what happened to start this war, both in the midst of negotiations, and then now here we are again asking for negotiations and some sort of end. I mean, that by itself is bad. But so Trump yesterday afternoon at an Oval Office meeting where the press was in attendance was asked about the Iran war and where it was going. And he said pretty confidently, well, I think this will be over with in a 2, maybe 3 weeks. But we're pretty close to getting it wrapped up. Well, obviously, I just showed you his Truth Social this morning. Well, it turns out that about 5 hours before that, this morning, Al Jazeera ran an interview with Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and the whole issue of the ceasefire, ironically, came up before Trump's did.
We receive messages from the American side, some are direct, and others come through our friends in the region. Wherever necessary, we respond to them. Therefore, there is currently no negotiation between us. Claims made in this regard are not correct. Our conditions for ending the war are clear. We do not accept a ceasefire. We are seeking an end to the war, not only in Iran but across the entire region. We seek guarantees that such aggressions will not be repeated, as well as the payment of compensation for the extent of the damages inflicted on us and on the people of Iran.
So a couple of things I want to ask you about that exchange. Let's just start off, first of all, with here's Abbas Araghchi. I think the interview was done the previous night when it was done. So he's saying right there will be no ceasefire. That's not even on the table for us. And then yet this morning, here you have President Trump saying they're begging me for a ceasefire, and I'll only do it if the Strait of Hormuz is opened up. I mean, just that disconnect between what the two sides are saying within literally hours apart. What does that tell you?
This is madness. I mean, I don't know what else to say. President Trump just makes all these outrageous statements that you don't make if you're a rational legal person. I'm kind of left speechless by the whole thing.
I've never seen this, by the way. That's pretty amazing.
What can you say? This goes on all the time. He just makes up these stories. He tells fairy tales. This is the president of the United States, the president of the leader of the most powerful country on the planet. And when you see him acting like this, it's a cause for great concern. I don't know what can you say.
Well, let's look at the other half of this equation, where it's ironically maybe a little bit easier to divine. You said just before I showed that sound clip there that we are in really deep kimchi, to use your phrase there. And I think he really defined the kimchi mess that we're in, the big barrel of kimchi, maybe even, in that all of the terms he set out there. So I wonder if you can maybe kind of lay out how you see this playing out if the Iranian side is willing to and can continue to wage this conflict and keep itself viable and militarily active to get those kinds of terms. And is there any possibility at all that the U.S. will give them? And then the biggest question is, this is maybe the overarching one, if the U.S. won't give in to that and Iran keeps demanding that, where can this go?
Well, the key dimension here is economic dimension. We don't want to lose sight of that. And the fact is that because the Iranians have in large part cut off the flow of oil and fertilizers and aluminum and natural gas out of the Middle East, and mainly out of the Persian Gulf, we are seeing serious trouble in the international economy. There's a very powerful sense among a lot of people that this will lead to a global recession for sure, and might very well lead to a global depression. And something has to be done to stop that. Of course, it's not only that the Iranians are preventing oil and fertilizer from leaving the Gulf. And when we talk about oil and fertilizer leaving the Gulf, it's important to realize that Iranian oil is leaving the Gulf, but it's oil from the other countries in the region, which are the 6 Gulf states. But the Iranians are doing even more than that. They're destroying infrastructure. They're destroying energy infrastructure in the region. And it's going to take years to rebuild that energy infrastructure. And this is going to have serious consequences for the international economy moving forward. And then on top of that, they are attacking businesses in the 6 Gulf states. They're interested in wrecking the economies of those 6 Gulf states. And if this goes far up the escalation ladder, they may go after the desalination plants in those Gulf states and do egregious damage to the societies, all the societies in those 6 countries that comprise the GCC. So the Iranians are in a position to do enormous damage to the international economy. They're in a position to do enormous damage to the 6 Gulf states. Furthermore, they are bombing away at American military bases. We have 13 major bases in the region, and by almost all accounts, all 13 are either damaged or destroyed. They've had a significant effect on our military presence in the region. They've damaged all sorts of aircraft, super expensive and important radars. And then when you look at Israel, the Israelis now report that 80% of Iranian missiles are getting through and hitting Iran. Just think about that. The Israelis are admitting that 80% are getting through, because what we're seeing happening now in this war is what we saw happen in the 12-day war last June. That's in June of 2025. At a certain point, the Israelis ran out of missiles that could be used to shoot down the incoming ballistic missiles. And the same thing is happening here. So 80% of the Iranian ballistic missiles are breaking through. And of course, the Iranians have lots of drones. They have both short range and long range ballistic missiles. So they're wreaking havoc on us and on our allies in the Gulf. So when you begin to put all of these pieces together, you see that we are in dire straits. Then, if you want to take it from another direction, you want to think about the fact that we went into this war with a series of goals. We talked about regime change. We talked about eliminating forever Iran's ballistic missile threat, getting them to stop supporting Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and also putting an end to their nuclear enrichment capability. Where are we on all of those goals? The answer is we're nowhere. We've achieved none of those goals. Just think about that. Regime change. President Trump likes to say we've had regime change. This is not a serious argument. This gets back to the fact that he talks like a mad king. We've not had regime change. The regime is in place. Oh, and by the way, the people who are now in charge of the regime are more hawkish and more committed to getting nuclear weapons than the previous leadership was. This is an improvement? I don't think so. And if you go back to February 27th, the day before the war started, the strait was open. The Strait of Hormuz was open on February 27th. It's now closed. And President Trump is indicating that he may walk away from this war with the strait closed. That really is quite remarkable. We've none of our goals, none of the key goals we've talked about. And furthermore, we've made it more likely that Iran will get nuclear weapons. And we're now in a situation where the strait is closed, and that's causing enormous damage to the international economy.
And by the way, I'm showing you, this is a live view of WTI right now. So it just popped back up to $100. It was down a little bit this morning with President Trump's comment, but now it seems like they're realizing the truth. But I'm just showing you the screen here. This right here where I've got the cursor, this was the day before the war started where oil was at $65 a barrel. And then when you back it up even further than that, looking back at 3 months, because that was kind of the buildup. But you see back here, it was $55 a barrel when there wasn't much risk of attack. And just the talking about it started rising it up here. And then now we are up in this area here with no apparent off ramp. This seems like it's going to have some long lasting effects.
Well, the thing is, Danny, there are stories in the newspaper that behind closed doors, the administration is thinking about what's going to happen if it hit $50 a barrel or even $200 a barrel. You want to understand that we're early in this war. The idea that this is going to be shut down in the next week or so, and we're going to live happily ever after, this is delusional. This one is just getting started. And again, the Iranians have us over a barrel. And Danny, you and I are clever individuals. And if we were playing Iran's hand, and we were dealing with an adversary like the United States and an adversary like Israel, and we had them over a barrel, we would not let them get off that barrel. We would increase the pressure on them. We would up the ante. So I would argue that the Iranians moving forward, if anything, are likely to be less cooperative. Why would you be cooperative with the United States and Israel? Again, they're an existential threat. You just saw what they did in Gaza. They executed the Israelis executed a genocide in Gaza, and we fully supported them under both President Biden and President Trump. Why would you trust the United States? Why would you not fear the United States greatly? The answer is you would fear them. You should fear them. The United States and Israel have their gun sights on you. Yeah, they talk about regime change, but they also sometimes talk about making you look like Syria. Well, when you're in that situation, you want to look for every lever you can get to put pressure on the United States and Israel. You want to play hardball.
And let me just show you, because it turns out that there are some clever people on the Iranian side, and they indeed are playing hardball. Let me just show you where their mind is and what they're thinking here. First of all, this is Parliamentary Speaker Ghalibaf this morning after President Trump's comments, and he's just saying, look, out of context quotes, manufacture. I don't even know what FOMO means. I'm probably exposing myself here, but he says it's just war profiteering 101. Do your own research, meaning don't listen to a word President Trump says about any kind of negotiations. But then he also said, and this was, I think, yesterday. Yeah, this was yesterday. He said, increasing signs that Iran intends to formalize control of the Strait of Hormuz and a view to collect tolls as effective war reparations. And he's continuing to say, hey, we don't have any expectation or intention to ever let go of this barrel, as you said, that they have us over. So they're making plans for a permanent change in the way oil is transited through the Gulf. What do you think of that?
I don't blame them at all. It's not in our interest. As an American, this situation makes me sick to my stomach. But what we're talking about is what they're going to do, what's in their national interest. This gets back to the nuclear question as well. Do I want to see Iran get nuclear weapons? Absolutely not. I think the consequences for proliferation would be great. And the fact is, you don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons. The less countries that have nuclear weapons around the world, the better. And that's certainly true in the Middle East. But if I'm playing Iran's hand after what just happened and has been happening for decades now, the incentives to get nuclear weapons would just be enormous. And this same basic logic applies here. I just say one other thing to you, Danny. You were asking me all these questions about President Trump and what I make of his outrageous comments, and I kind of don't know what to say. But let's just ask this question. When you listen to Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump, both of them speak about the war in Iran and about foreign policy issues in general, and then you compare that with how the Iranian foreign minister, Mr. Arashi, speaks and how he reasons. Who do you think is the real adult among those three? Who do you think is the person who really understands basic strategic logic and can talk about international politics in a coherent and thoughtful and impressive way? I think the answer is unequivocally clear. It's the Iranian foreign minister. And I think people all around the world, when they listen to President Trump and the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of War speak, understand very quickly that U.S. leadership is basically bankrupt. And this is why we're in this desperate situation. This is why we're on the verge of tanking the global economy. It's because the United States is in charge and U.S. leadership, I'd go further than saying it's not up for the job. It's actually causing us to pursue disastrous policies. And this is not only bad for the United States, it's bad for the world.
Yeah, that's a really concerning thing with the evidence, unfortunately, completely corroborates your concern. And I want to stay in on that theme for a second on the American leadership. It's not just what they say and some of the actions they're taking here. I want to back up just a wee bit here and talk about the way we got into this in war at all, this war of choice, and what might have been in their minds when they're setting objectives before they started dropping the first bomb. You mentioned a second ago that one of the claims that we made was they're going to destroy their missile capability, their manufacturing and their launchers and all of that. Well, it couldn't have been, it could not have been something we didn't know, that there are, by most reports now, 27 versions of what I'm showing you on here. This is Yazd Granite Fortress, one of the bigger ones, but apparently there are 26 others at least. Some have said 31. But we knew for sure that you're not going to get at the manufacturing capacity because they foresaw this, the Iranians did, for decades ago, and they started building these incredibly elaborate underground missile cities, which has the ability to launch from underground and, of course, transport things underground and then manufacture things. So they've had all their manufacturing capacity beyond the range, as you can see, of the missiles depicted on the upper left-hand corner there. We can't get at them. So now then we're proving that we can't get at them. And so one has to ask the question, what could we have been thinking to set as an objective, something that we know that technically we can't get at? Can you give us some light on what you think?
Yeah, I think, Danny, that they believed, and when I say they, I'm talking about the Trump administration and the Netanyahu administration in Israel, because they were a tag team before and they're a tag team now in conducting this war. But they believed that they could win a quick and decisive victory. They believed that a shock and awe campaign that included decapitation in the first day or two or three of the conflict would bring Iran or bring the regime to its knees. And that would enable all of the dissenters in the population, all the protesters, all the people who want to topple the regime. It would bring them out on the streets and they would overthrow the regime. And we would end up with a new leadership in Iran that understood that we are the boss and that you have to dance to our tune. This was the basic strategy that we went into the war with. And it's quite clear if you read this big piece on the New York Times that explained how we got into the war, and you follow the Israeli press, that David Barnea, who's the head of Mossad, was the principal proponent of this view. And he did an exceptionally good job of selling it, not only to Prime Minister Netanyahu, but to the Trump administration in general and President Trump in particular. Barnea spent a great deal of time in the United States, and he was very successful at convincing the White House that the regime in Iran was very fragile. I mean, that's an important element in the story. You have to convince the Americans that the regime is fragile, and all you have to do is whack it really hard, shock and awe, and decapitate the top leaders. And because it's weak, it will collapse. And we know how many protesters there will be. There'll be gazillions of protesters because there are all these people who are deeply unhappy with the regime. That's the basic story we told ourselves. And so when we went into the war, we didn't pay attention to their capability to launch missiles from underneath cities because we thought that was largely irrelevant. You remember President Trump said that he was told the strait would be closed. President Trump said he was told that the strait would be closed before the war, but he ignored that warning. And again, he ignored the warning because he thought we were going to win a quick and decisive victory. This is what happens oftentimes when countries go to war. They think that they'll win a quick and decisive victory. And 2 or 3 years later, they find themselves in a long war of attrition. You want to remember when Adolf Hitler invaded the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941, he didn't think he was going to end up killing himself in a bunker in Berlin in April 1945. That was not what he had in mind. He thought he was going to duplicate what he did in France in 1940. He thought what would happen in the Soviet Union in 1941 would look like what happened in France in May and June of 1940. But of course, that didn't happen. And it's a similar situation here, right? We thought we were going to win a great victory. And by the way, you remember Iraq, you remember Afghanistan. Does it sound familiar?
Well, I'll tell you it's familiar is because I have used that analogy of the 1941 invasion into the Soviet Union as being a problem. And like Hitler saw how easy it was in France. I think he thought it was going to be easy here, just like on a smaller scale, but categorically similar. We thought what happened in Venezuela would be replicated here. And I know for sure that there are people inside the administration that did tell President Trump that. And then now, as you say, we may have bitten off our Waterloo.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. Vietnam is different because Vietnam was a case where we went in understanding that we were in real trouble, number one, and that we really did not have a magic formula. We thought that we could wing it. We thought that we could figure out how to do it along the way, gradual escalation, and we could bring the North Vietnamese to the bargaining table, and we could get a deal just by inflicting lots of pain on them. It was a pure punishment campaign, but it didn't work. And I think if you look at where the Trump administration and the Israelis are today, we're sort of in a similar situation to where we were in Vietnam. I mean, there's no question that there's a big difference in this case. We went into the war thinking we were going to win a quick and decisive victory, which was not the case in Vietnam. But if you look at where we are today and where we were in the Vietnam War from start to finish, they bear marked similarity. We have no winning strategy. I remember the day. Go ahead.